My name is Jordan Blake. I was 23 when I first walked into the steel and glass monster, known as Vexler Consulting. A fresh college grad with a modest degree in business strategy, a used Hyundai Elantra, and one oversized dream tucked beneath my shaking confidence. I was naive. I'll admit that now. I thought hard work would earn respect, that overtime meant loyalty, and that talent would be recognized like clockwork. But nothing about Vexler was built to nurture potential. It was a jungle, and at the top of that corporate food chain sat Marcus Dunley, my first boss. He was the kind of man whose cologne entered the room before he did, strong, sharp, and trying too hard. His smile was all performance, like a late-night infomercial. Marcus didn't mentor. He dominated. He didn't encourage. He tested. And when he looked at me on my first day, young, eager, full of fire, I saw it in his eyes. He didn't see me as potential. He saw me as competition. I remember the very first words he said to me. Not welcome, not congrats. No. He leaned against his office doorway, arms folded, and smirked like he already knew my expiration date. Hope you didn't think a degree means success around here, Blake. Most of you kids don't make it past 6 months. I laughed awkwardly, unsure if it was a joke. It wasn't. I pushed myself harder than I thought possible. Stayed past midnight. Memorized client portfolios. Took notes during every conference call like my life depended on it. But nothing I did was enough for Marcus. He'd forget to include me in meetings. Took credit for presentations I built from scratch. Once, I watched him nod as the CEO praised his Q3 turnaround report, the same one I had bled over during 2 sleepless weekends. When I brought it up, he leaned in with that rehearsed grin and said, "That's how the game works, Blake. If you're smart, you'll learn to watch and stay quiet." The office was all glass. You'd think that meant transparency. But behind those walls, secrets festered like mold. Then came the small, strange signs, things most people would ignore. My desk chair lowered itself an inch each morning, as if someone messed with the lever. Important emails mysteriously landed in my spam folder. A team outing I never got invited to, yet somehow my name was listed as absent without explanation. When I asked Marcus about it, he gave me a shrug and said, "Maybe you should try being more visible." His tone was casual, but something twisted inside me. There was that flicker in his eyes again, amusement, like I was a pet he enjoyed torturing. I remember the day the uneasiness truly sunk in. It was a Wednesday. Rain smeared across the office windows like gray watercolor. I was walking back from the copy room when I heard my name through the slightly cracked door to Marcus's office. "Jordan Blake? That kid's a placeholder. He's too soft for this line of work. Trust me, he'll be gone by Q4. The voice was unmistakable. I froze, heartbeat rising into my throat. There was silence, then muffled laughter. That was the moment something shifted. Not in them, in me. I didn't go home that night. I stayed in the office long after the lights dimmed, watching the rain blur my reflection in the window. I thought about packing up my things. Leaving. Starting somewhere smaller, somewhere safer. But then something colder settled in. Why should I run? They'd already written me off. Dismissed me. Mocked me. So, I decided right there. I'd stay. But not as prey. As a ghost. A shadow. I would learn everything. Play the game. And one day, they'd choke on their arrogance. Over the next few weeks, I became invisible. Not in performance, but in presence. I stopped speaking in meetings. Let Marcus think I was fading. But I was watching. Listening. Recording. I built a private archive of every deal he mishandled, every email he twisted, every shortcut he took. I started working late nights, but not on Vexler's projects. I was building my own. Researching tech markets, networking with startup CEOs, attending shadow webinars under a pseudonym. And through it all, I kept one thought etched into my mind. He said I'd never succeed. The strangest part? The more I pulled back, the more relaxed Marcus became. He let his guard down, slipped up more, began showing off. He didn't notice the way I glanced at his calendar. Didn't question why I asked about company patents and API loopholes. Didn't blink when I requested access to old client turnover data. He had already buried me in his mind, didn't expect me to rise from under the dirt. One night, while reviewing old pitch decks Marcus had stolen from me, I noticed a familiar name in the archive contacts. Valerie Chen, a former Vexler exec who left after some internal conflict. I found her on LinkedIn. She remembered me. More importantly, she remembered Marcus. He stole more than ideas, Jordan. I just didn't have the fight left in me to prove it. We talked for hours. And by sunrise, a plan was born. That was the last time I felt like the same person. Something in me had cracked open. A deeper will, sharp-edged and cold. Not revenge for revenge's sake, but justice served slow, silent, and surgical. And Marcus? He wouldn't see it coming. He never saw me at all. I started noticing it in the smallest of things, just little ticks in his voice during the few times we spoke after I took over. The confidence that used to boom from his chest was now tucked between mumbles. He had this way of saying "sure thing, boss" with a tight jaw, like the words choked on their way out. It didn't sit right with me. This was the same man who once stood behind a polished desk and told me I wasn't management material. Now he was here, clocking in on my payroll. The first time I passed by his office, well, his former office, he didn't even look up. He kept his eyes glued to the screen like I wasn't even there. I caught the side of his face, though. It wasn't neutral, it was flushed. Embarrassed, maybe. Or angry. But I kept walking. I wasn't trying to gloat. Truth is, I hadn't even meant for things to play out this way. I'd left that job nearly 4 years ago after he told me I lacked vision. Those were his exact words. You've got a good work ethic, but you just don't have the leadership instinct. Some people are just meant to follow. I can't lie, those words haunted me for months. They echoed through the empty apartment I rented after I left the city. They hummed under my breath while I did freelance contracts to stay afloat. But something shifted when I stopped trying to prove him wrong and just focused on building what I believed in. And now, here we were. Still, something was off. I tried to keep things professional, but the awkwardness was impossible to ignore. People in the office, those who used to worship him, acted weird around me too. They'd smile a little too hard, laugh a little too loud. One guy even called me "sir" 3 times in one sentence. Then came the meeting. It was a standard all-hands review. I was walking everyone through quarterly performance numbers, but I noticed Carter, my old boss, kept flipping his pen over in his hand, over and over again. He wouldn't look up. When I asked if anyone had suggestions for a struggling department, he barely opened his mouth before someone else cut in. That was the moment it really sank in. They weren't just trying to adjust to a new CEO. They were avoiding the fact that the guy they used to follow now had to report to someone they never thought would rise. I sat back in my chair after the meeting ended and watched Carter gather his papers. His hands were trembling just slightly. No one else seemed to notice, but I did. I knew that body language all too well. It was pride in a losing battle. A man who once shaped the rules now bending to them. I walked into the hallway, and just before he exited, he turned and muttered something under his breath. I couldn't hear the whole thing, but I caught the words "unreal" and "kid." Kid. He used to call me that when I worked for him. Not in a warm, mentoring way. No, it was always laced with condescension. Like I was some intern playing dress-up. And now, that same tone was leaking through again, even though the power dynamic had reversed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying every comment, every hesitation in his voice, every time he tried to fade into the background like he wasn't slowly unraveling. The more I thought about it, the more it felt deliberate. It wasn't just awkwardness, it was resentment. Was he trying to sabotage things from the inside? I dismissed the idea immediately. It sounded paranoid. But that's the problem with scars. They itch even when the wound has healed. I couldn't stop thinking about how someone like him would handle this kind of reversal. I knew him. He didn't take well to losing control. I remembered one time, years ago, when another employee got promoted ahead of his favorite. He spent weeks subtly undermining the new guy, assigning him impossible deadlines, questioning his decisions in front of clients. It was never direct, never enough to be caught, but it was real. And now, That memory started breathing new life in my chest. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual. The office was quiet, just the hum of copy machines and the click of my shoes against tile. I went straight to the analytics team. I wasn't looking for dirt. I just wanted clarity. I asked them to run a report on recent workflow submissions and access logs. Just a standard audit, I told them. Something didn't feel right. Later that afternoon, I got the results. Nothing illegal. Nothing overtly damaging. But there were patterns. Several key reports had been submitted with incorrect numbers, tiny discrepancies, easily chalked up to human error. But they had all passed through Carter's department. A few project timelines had quietly shifted, just slightly enough to look like the team was falling behind. Again, all routed through Carter's review. Coincidence? Maybe. But in a world of spreadsheets and numbers, consistency is currency. And what I saw was inconsistency with a motive. I didn't act on it immediately. I needed more than patterns. I needed proof. But the suspicion, once lit, was impossible to extinguish. I started watching him more closely. Every interaction, every meeting, every document with his name on it. And the more I looked, the more it felt deliberate. I was in a weird place emotionally. Part of me was hurt. Not because he doubted me. I'd grown numb to that long ago, but because I'd let him back in. I'd believed, foolishly, that success would earn me peace. That the past would vanish once I proved myself. But people like Carter don't just vanish. They adapt. They hide in plain sight. I thought about confronting him, just walking into his office and asking outright, "Are you trying to sabotage me?" But what would that accomplish? If he was guilty, he'd lie. If he wasn't, I'd look paranoid. Either way, I'd come off unprofessional. So instead, I decided to play it smarter. I set a filter in our internal systems. Any document edited by Carter would be flagged to my private folder. I wanted eyes on everything. Not because I was afraid of him, but because I knew I couldn't afford another blind spot. Not again. I didn't tell anyone. Not HR, not legal, not even my assistant. I needed to be sure. The feeling in my gut was strong, but suspicion without evidence is just a whisper in the dark. And so I waited. Every day I walked into the office with a calm face, greeted him the same way I did everyone else, nodded when he passed by, even laughed at the occasional joke in team meetings. But under the surface, I was hunting. And Carter, he didn't even know the storm he was standing in. I don't remember what exactly triggered the shift from suspicion to certainty, but it happened during a late evening in October. I was in my new corner office, skyscraper view, leather chair, polished walnut desk. The kind of room that once belonged to people like him. Now it was mine. I had just wrapped up a meeting with my executive team when I saw an email notification blink across my screen. It was from HR. Subject line: New hire orientation, supervisor assignment update. I clicked it open with half a mind to forward it to my assistant. But then I saw his name. Daniel F. Crawley. My old boss. The same man who once looked at me with contempt dripping from his voice as he said, "You don't have what it takes to lead. People like you should know when to stop dreaming." It was surreal. For a moment, my body froze. The silence in my office felt heavier. I leaned back, staring at the screen like it was some kind of joke. Had the universe just handed me poetic justice, wrapped in corporate formatting? I opened the attached onboarding schedule, and there it was. He'd been assigned to a junior project lead position under my division. Technically, he would report to my department VP. But ultimately, I was in charge. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or drive straight home and scream into a pillow. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the city lights below. The skyline glittered, indifferent and cold, just like Daniel used to be. For the next few days, I said nothing. I watched the office from a distance, silently waiting for him to appear. HR told me he was still in transition. His former firm had folded after a series of poor decisions, including ones he had made. He'd taken a massive pay cut to join us. Desperate for a job. Any job. The man who once told me to stick to the basics and stop overcomplicating things had been forced to crawl into the very system he tried to keep me out of. I couldn't help but revisit the memory of our last real conversation years ago. I had gone to him with an idea, a leaner way to streamline client onboarding using predictive modeling. He didn't even glance at my mock-ups. He said, "This place runs on tradition, not experiments. If you want to play scientist, find a lab." That conversation crushed something inside me back then.
But now?
I was the head of an innovation-first firm that did use predictive modeling. It had become our flagship service. The very thing he'd belittled had turned into my empire. On the day he officially started, I walked into the open-floor workspace unannounced. My presence drew attention, as it always did now. Heads turned, conversations hushed. People respected me. Some feared me. That was new. And then I saw him. Daniel Crawley stood by a temporary desk near the back wall. His hair grayer, his posture tighter, his face a map of hard years. He wore a suit that didn't quite fit. Maybe he couldn't afford tailoring anymore. Or maybe he just didn't care. He didn't see me at first. But when he did, I watched the recognition bloom in his eyes, followed by disbelief. And then, worst of all, shame. He opened his mouth. I imagined he would say something, anything. Maybe he'd fake a smile, try to regain the upper hand. But he didn't. He just lowered his gaze, adjusted the folder in his hand, and gave me a short, tight nod. I could have walked right past him, ignored him like he once did me. But I didn't.
"Daniel," I said.
My voice was steady, colder than I expected. He looked up again. "Sir," he said. The word hit me like a slow-burning match.
"Sir."
The man who once laughed at me now had to address me with formality. I didn't respond. I just looked at him, letting the silence thicken. Then I turned and walked away. Later that afternoon, I sat in my office, going through emails when one came from my department VP. Subject: Performance Plan Request, Daniel Crawley. He was already falling behind. Missing metrics. Struggling to adapt. His outdated methods were dragging the team. Part of me wanted to be merciful, to remember that people change, that circumstances can break even the proudest man. But another part, darker, colder, wanted him to feel every ounce of what he once made me feel. I clicked the reply button and paused. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every humiliating moment, every time Daniel overlooked my ideas, took credit for my work, or made me the butt of office jokes. Back then, I had no power to fight back. Just silent rage and the desperate need to prove myself. Now I had the power. But was revenge what I really wanted? The next morning, I called a closed-door meeting with him. No assistants. No intermediaries. He entered my office with visible hesitation. "You asked to see me?" "Sit," I said.
He did.
We sat in silence for a while. I let the discomfort stew. "I saw your numbers," I said finally. "They're not good." He nodded. "I know. I'm trying to adapt. Things have changed." "They have," I said. "You're in a very different place now." He looked up at me, eyes tired. "I'm not here to pretend I didn't wrong you," he said quietly. "I did. I was arrogant. I dismissed you. I underestimated what you were capable of." The honesty surprised me. For a second, I wasn't sure how to react. He continued, "I don't expect forgiveness. But I do need this job. My wife is sick. We lost our home. I didn't have anywhere else to go." And just like that, the revenge fantasy started to crumble. He wasn't the villain anymore. He was just a broken man, paying for the same sins he once inflicted on others. I leaned back in my chair. "I don't owe you anything," I said. "I know. But I won't sabotage you. What happens next is up to you." He looked at me, really looked, and nodded. There was no anger in his expression, just the weight of a man who knew he had finally hit the bottom. I dismissed him, and he left the office without another word. That evening, I watched him from afar, quietly taking notes at a team meeting, trying to absorb knowledge from people half his age. The man who said I'd never succeed was now forced to redefine his entire existence in the company I built from nothing. And maybe that was justice. Or maybe it was redemption. Either way, I had reached the moment of truth. And it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like closure. The day I'd fantasized about 1,000 times came cloaked in silence. I stood at the edge of the long conference table, the title plate in front of me gleaming like a medal I'd earned in blood. CEO, Nathaniel Cruz. My suit was crisp, my spine straight, but inside, I was a battlefield, every scar, every humiliation under Mason's watch rising to the surface like ghosts summoned for reckoning. The door opened, and in walked the man who once mocked my ambition, scoffed at my ideas, and told me in front of an entire team, "You're not cut out for leadership. Some people are meant to follow." Mason. Now, he held a folder like a shield, his eyes cautiously avoiding mine as he shuffled in. He wasn't leading a meeting anymore. He wasn't barking orders. He was being on board.
By me.
"Mr. Cruz," he muttered, taking a seat. "Mr. Cruz." Not Nate, not "Hey kid," not the condescending tone he used when I was an intern trembling outside his office door.
No.
Now, I was the one sitting at the head of the table, and Mason? He was just another employee. I let the silence stretch. He fidgeted. "I didn't think," he began, clearing his throat. "I didn't expect you'd be the one running Soulvantage." I smiled. Not with joy, something colder, sharper. "No one did," I replied evenly. "Especially you." He looked up, and for the first time, I saw it: shame. A flicker of recognition passed between us, a silent confession of everything he'd done to me. The sabotaged reports, the way he'd rerouted credit for my ideas, the time he laughed when I asked for mentorship. I stood and walked slowly around the table, never breaking eye contact. "Let's not pretend you don't remember how this went," I said. "When I pitched the energy efficiency model, you called it naive idealism. You told the board I was wasting company resources." He winced. I stopped behind his chair. "And when I got that offer from Crest Tech, you advised me against taking it. Said I'd be swallowed whole. That I didn't have what it takes to survive in real business." He shifted. "Nathaniel." No, my voice cut through him like a scalpel. "You don't get to rewrite the past now. You don't get to pretend this is just another job transfer. You built your career on tearing down people like me. People who didn't look like you, sound like you, play the same games. You humiliated me, Mason." "I didn't realize," he said quietly. "I was hard on everyone. That's how the industry works." I laughed low, bitter. "No, you were targeted. Strategic. You knew exactly what you were doing." And now, I circled back to my chair and sat down slowly, folding my hands. "Now you answer to me." His jaw tightened. "I need this job." I leaned in. "I know." The silence sat heavy between us, filled with all the years he thought he'd won. "And I didn't hire you to be cruel," I said finally. "But I didn't hire you out of mercy, either. I want you here. I want you to see every day what happens when you underestimate the wrong person." He swallowed hard. I continued. "You'll report to my director of strategy. You'll handle logistics. No more leadership roles. No team under you. You'll execute, not direct." He nodded once, humiliated. Then came the unexpected twist. "There's something you don't know," he said suddenly. "Back when you left for Crest Tech, I tried to block the board from contacting you. I was afraid you'd actually succeed." My breath hitched, but only for a moment. "Of course you were," I said flatly. He looked up, and for the first time, the bravado was stripped away. "You remind me of my younger self, except better.
Smarter.
Hungrier." And I hated that, because I knew, deep down, that you'd do what I never could. "You mean lead with integrity?" He looked away. That was all I needed. I stood, gathering my papers. "Your desk assignment is down the hall. You'll find her badge in HR. You start tomorrow at 8 sharp. Dismissed." He hesitated, then rose slowly. As he walked toward the door, he paused. "I'm sorry, Nathaniel." I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because I didn't need to. The power had already shifted. Apologies meant nothing now, not when the past had already been carved in stone. He left without another word. I exhaled deeply, staring out the floor-to-ceiling window behind me. The city stretched far and wide, every building a symbol of every obstacle I'd torn down to be here. And somewhere in that silence I smiled. Because I had already won. I stood in the glass-walled corner office, staring down at the city that used to feel so unreachable, its towers once symbols of everything I'd never been allowed to touch. The silence in the room was only broken by the faint ticking of the designer clock behind me.
The
Office had been mine for almost a year now. Still, the moment didn't feel fully real until the knock came. 3 quiet raps. I didn't even need to ask who it was. I knew his knock. It used to follow me like a threat when I was an intern, always too soft to seem intimidating but always timed to make me flinch. "Come in," I said without turning. The door opened and closed behind him. I heard the gentle creak of the leather guest chair as he sat down without waiting to be invited. That was just like him, still holding on to scraps of the power he once wielded like a sledgehammer. "How can I help you, Gerald?" I asked calmly, finally turning to face him. He looked tired, smaller. His tailored suit couldn't hide the slouched shoulders or the heavy bags under his eyes. There was a hesitation in him now, a crack in his voice, a shift in his confidence. I was wondering if we could talk," he said, folding his hands awkwardly in his lap. I walked over slowly and took the seat across from him, watching him squirm under my silence. "You remember when you told me I'd never make it?" I asked flatly. He flinched.
Yes.
I said a lot of things back then. I was under pressure. No. I cut him off. "You weren't under pressure. You were in control. You just didn't think I was worth anything." Gerald's mouth twitched. "You were inexperienced. Arrogant. You thought you knew better than everyone else." "I did know better," I said, eyes narrowed. "You just didn't want to admit that someone like me had ideas you couldn't understand. You mocked every pitch, took credit for my best work, and when I finally stood up for myself, you sabotaged my career." He looked down, the weight of memory dragging his gaze to the floor. "I regret it," he whispered. "All of it. Every bit of it. You proved me wrong. Over and over again." I let the silence stretch. In truth, I dreamed of this moment more times than I could count. When I was eating ramen on the floor of my one-room apartment, rejected by every company he'd blacklisted me from. When I worked weekends just to prove to myself that I could. When I started my own company from a crumbling co-working space with secondhand laptops and a staff of 3. And especially the day I got the email from HR. The resume. His resume. It was clean and professional. No sign of the cruelty or manipulation behind his layoffs, or the way he pitted young employees against each other like gladiators. He didn't mention me, of course. But I knew it was no accident he applied here. He must have known I was the CEO. Maybe he hoped I'd forgotten. Or forgiven. I hadn't done either. But I had hired him. That was the part that surprised even me. I'd brought him in, kept him at a distance, watched him flinch every time he passed me in the hallway. He was good at his job, technically sound, punctual, efficient. But the confidence was gone. He worked like someone constantly afraid the rug would be pulled from under him. And maybe that was why I didn't fire him. Maybe I liked watching him squirm, waiting for the day I'd push him out the door just like he'd done to me. "Why are you really here, Gerald?" I asked finally. He exhaled hard. "Because I don't want this to hang between us anymore. Because I can't sleep knowing I built my success on pushing down people who deserved better. Because I look at you now, and I realize I tried to destroy the very person this company needs most." I wanted to hate him, but what I felt instead was emptiness. Like his apology was years too late and miles too short. I thought it would feel satisfying, this confession, this surrender. It didn't. "I'm not interested in your guilt," I said coolly. "I'm interested in what you do next." He looked up. "I don't need your apology," I continued. "I need you to never do to anyone what you did to me. I need you to mentor people without crushing them. I need you to support, not sabotage. That's the only redemption I'll ever accept from you." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening slightly. "I can do that." We sat in silence a while longer, the tension thawing, not into warmth, but into a sort of uneasy truce. He rose to leave, then turned back. "You're a better leader than I ever was," he said. "And not just because of what you've built, but because you didn't become me." Then he left, closing the door behind him softly. I stared after him for a long time. The city outside still pulsed with light and noise, but something inside me had quieted. I didn't need to scream to be heard anymore. I didn't need to fight to prove I belonged. I was here, and that was enough. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment, glass of wine in hand, city lights flickering below. My phone buzzed. A message from an old friend I hadn't heard from in years. "Just saw the Forbes article. CEO of the year."
Damn.
"You really made it." I smiled faintly and typed back.
Yeah.
"They used to say I never would." Then, just as I turned off the lights, another message came through. From my old mentor. "Gerald, thank you for the second chance. I won't waste it." I stared at the words for a long time. And that's when it hit me. Not everyone who tries to break you can stop your rise. And not every victory comes from revenge. Some of the sweetest ones come from knowing they now serve the dream they once tried to kill. Final line. The man who said I'd never succeed now brings me coffee every Monday morning, always hot, always silent, always a little too careful not to spill.